Hi everyone, welcome to Birthing at Home, a podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I've had 2 home births in April 2020 and in June 2023. I'm a mental health nurse and an ex-student midwife that has a strong passion for birth and supporting women. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land I'm recording on in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. I would also like to acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been birthing at home on country for tens of thousands of years prior to the British invasion and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. This is episode 12, and today we get to listen to Poppy from New Zealand share her home birth story of the birth of 3.5-year-old Frankie and her free birth with 10-month-old Alfred. It was awesome to talk to Poppy, and it really shows how birth stories can connect us. Poppy's stories also demonstrate how in the birth world it is extremely common and basically commonplace for women's autonomy to make decisions and accept risks to be overthrown or challenged by health professionals. What actually matters is how the woman feels and the informed decisions she makes about her body and her baby. I'm really inspired by Poppy's stories and hope you are too. And if you would like to help me spread the word of home birth, please share the podcast or check out my Etsy store. The link is in the episode description, where you can buy t-shirts and baby onesies to celebrate being born at home and to help support the podcast. Enjoy. Welcome, Poppy, to the Birthing at Home, a podcast.
Thanks for having me. Oh, wow.
This is the second time that we've done this, everybody, and I'm still not sure that it's working.
But we're gonna soldier on because it will be fine.
Yeah. Do you mind telling everybody, Poppy, like where you are? You're obviously in New Zealand in Northland,
Mm-hmm.
but like about what you do, who's in your family, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I am in the Hokianga, which is the north of the North Island, and we moved here about 2.5 years ago, and I live here. Well, I actually live in my parents' orchard in our house, our tiny home that is not so tiny anymore, but we moved it up here from Auckland. Yep. And it's me and my partner Tobias and our 2 kids, Frankie Rose, who's 3.5, and Alfred, who is 10 months.
Amazing. That's very cool that you live on an orchard.
Yeah, no, it has its benefits in summer if the possums don't get everything.
Yeah. I've seen you post some things on your Instagram, and it looks kind of like whimsical, like, or magical, like when you're hanging up the washing on the clothesline and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, honestly, clean washing on a sunny day is my love language. It really is.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you had both Frankie and Alfred at home, is that right?
Yeah, so Frank was born in the bathroom in Auckland and Alfred was born in the living room up north. But yeah, both at home.
Yeah. I guess one of the first questions to ask then is, before you got pregnant with Frankie, did you know that you could birth at home, or what did you know of home birth?
Well, I definitely... It's not that it was particularly in the forefront of my knowledge, home birth. It just was the way I was always going to do it, I suppose. I'm one of 4, and my mum had my older brother, myself, and my younger brother in the hospital, and then had my younger sister at home. So I knew that it was a thing. And then my sister... a year before I had Frankie, had her son at home. And so we were all there rallying around.
Oh, cool.
And that's where I met Jude, who would go on to be my midwife. She was the person who kind of stepped in at my sister's birth. So that was my first very kind of immediate acceptance of like, yeah, this is definitely what I'm going to do. But also it's because my best friend at the time had her daughter in the hospital and I was there with her, and it was awful. For like she, you know, of course I want to be careful.
Yeah,
I want to
wow.
be careful here, but she had her experience and she was happy and fine.
Yeah.
But as a witness to, you know, not being in the birth kind of world of like, you know, in and out of it, I was just not comfortable at all with the hospital experience that I witnessed. And so, yeah, it just kind of confirmed it. I was like, cool, no, don't need to go there.
Yeah. And, you know, having these friends and family members have these experiences, including home birth experiences, what was Tobias's thoughts on home birth? Did he know what it was, or? Yeah,
well, I think kind of same as me. He was just kind of like, oh, yeah, of course we'll have the baby at home. I think, you know, I suppose because I was so sure-footed, he was just like, sweet. But, you know, there is this big element of him that was like, no, this, like I trust it. I trust you. I trust the process. It will be fine. We had Jude, who, again, was just really supportive. She was... like, as soon as we found out we were pregnant, we both were like, oh, she's who we'll have, like, no doubt. And, so we both kind of dove into the research, or I regurgitated research to him. And we just confidently were like, nah, we'll do this at home with... I mean, it was COVID time, so we were, because this is 2020, so we were a bit upset that we weren't going to be able to have my family there, so it was just us. So we were like, nah, we want Jude and we'll have the baby at home. And we didn't want to be in the hospital anyway, but we definitely didn't want to be in the hospital with, like, you know, the COVID narrative around us. So we were like, it was just, it was an easy decision, really.
Yeah. I remember when I had Murphy, who's also 3.5, and I'd already, you know, made the decision that, you know, I'm having a home birth. But then when COVID happened, people were jumping ship out of hospital and like, oh, I want to have a home birth. And I was like, oh, I've made the right decision, because I do not want to be going where all the sick people are going. Yeah, because I think for me, the easy part of it was that hospitals are for emergencies and for, you know, they work on a kind of call and response thing. Like, they're like, I have a job to do, I'm going to go in and do it. I didn't feel like I was going to have any kind of issue. It just, you know, birth to me wasn't an emergency. It wasn't going to be an issue. So I was like, why would I go there? Yeah. And we definitely live a kind of holistic approach to everything anyway. You know, we rarely go to the doctors. We rarely go, you know, we try and sort as much out ourselves first and observe ourselves first before we outsource anything. So it just felt like an unnecessary outsource, which I know to a lot of people is like, but it's a baby, like, you know, but to us it was just that, it was that simple. Yeah, it's just normal, boring birth. Yeah, it really was just any other day. I mean, we conceived consciously. We knew that we wanted it to happen. I devoured the Freebirth Society podcast. Yeah, amazing. And I knew free birth was a thing, so I was like, God, if free birth is a thing, I can definitely do this at home with Jude. So when I got pregnant with Frank, I said to Jude, you know, look, I want to take as much responsibility as possible and I want to learn. And she just said, if you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach. And she's an older woman. She was almost in her 70s at this point, and she was just like, great, you know, this is the kind of line I want to walk with you. And she taught me a lot. And, you know, she was still a medicalized government-funded midwife, so there were still certain boxes I had to fill and, you know,
please the system with. So I did the bare minimum, which was I had to pee on a stick every now and then and check, for UTIs or whatever. But that really is it. She did kind of physical palpations. I didn't what's the word? Yeah. I didn't have any scans or anything like that.
Cool.
And it was just us at home, really. We were building a house at the time, which was quite a lot, but that was, I felt great. The pregnancy was easy and great. And I could, right up till literally the day I went into labor, I was chasing turkeys out of our paddock because they were shitting everywhere. And so I was go. And, and also Jude respected everything. She was fine with no vaccines. She was fine with no, scans. She was fine with me refusing literally everything. She would just kind of laugh at me in the end, like, I have to ask you this even though I know your answer. So it was very, very easy, very easy up until the end. And I was 41 weeks and I got a sore because I've got herpes, and I got a sore. Yeah. And I was very open about it because I feel like we need to be open about it. Everybody needs to talk about it more.
Stigma. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just said to her, look, I've got a sore. And a lot changed from then. And she just said, look, there's risks. And I said, I know. And all of a sudden a cesarean was thrown into the mix. And I just was like, what?
Oh,
no.
whoa.
Like, okay. And so we talked about, I talked about diet and look, I will clear this. I will get rid of this. I'm not going into the hospital. Like, this is not going to be my story now. And then I think 2 or 3 days. And then obviously I had this huge process at home with Tobias, like crying and oh my God. But I cleared it. And then I went into labor, I think 2 days later.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
It was pretty full on, but I get it, but it was kind of, it was quite a shock, obviously. It was a lot to go through right at the end. And so we went into labor at 41 weeks and 5 days at home, all good. In the evening, I think it was, we were watching something and I was like, oh, I can feel something. And then, oh, I can feel it again. It was, it was just kind of easy. It really was. It was pleasant even. Like, it was just kind of like, oh, okay, this is happening. And I let Jude know and me and Toby were like, okay. And then, but, and then I went to bed and then I was like, oh, okay. And it kept me up quite a bit. They were pretty regular, but it was enough to keep me awake, but not enough for me to like raise any kind of alarm. And like I said, we were still building a house. So the next day when I was like, no, this is definitely labor. Toby was like, right, I've got to go and like do the hot water. And so he was literally running around finishing all the plumbing off while I was in labor so that I could have my pool.
Oh my gosh, of course. Oh no.
Yeah, it was
just going back a little bit.
Something.
Did you do?
Sorry. Yeah.
Did you? No, that's okay. Just going back a little bit. Did you do any like birth education or like birth preps kind of stuff during your pregnancy with Frankie?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would class the research I did as self-education for sure. I didn't, I did a lot of work. I did a lot of work with Jude. Like I said, every single thing that she asked me to do, I was like, why? What is this for? What is this for? There was a bit of a thing with a growth chart at one point Frankie was measuring small. And I just looked at Jude and I was like, I'm small and Tobias isn't enormous. Like, maybe we just have a small baby. Maybe that's just our babies. And she was like, yeah, okay. But yeah, so we, everything I questioned and everything I wanted to know why. And it was the start of a long journey because it carried on after Frankie was born as well. So yeah, I like I said, I devoured podcasts. Any birth story I could listen to, I did. And just women in general. I just wanted to talk to women who actually did the thing and ask their opinions. And though, you know, I will say that I made a decision pretty quickly that I felt that a lot of birth trauma wasn't necessary birth trauma. So I did make an active decision to not engage in a lot of birth stories because it didn't feel like something that I wanted to, like I think I had a lot of people be like, but what if, and, you know, don't you want to know like the risks? And I was like, I know the risks, but there's a difference to me between hearing all these traumatic stories and knowing risks, if that makes sense. I remember I came back from an appointment when I was pregnant with my Frankie this year or so, and I was saying to my colleague, you know, birthing at home, blah 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 blah, and he was like, but like if you need to go to hospital, which hospital will you be going to? And then I think a few weeks later, like in the office, he was like, oh, like, have you just packed a hospital bag just in case? And everybody's different, but I was very much of the mindset like, no, I'm gonna have my baby at home. So I haven't prepared for any of those things because I'm going to be having my baby at home. You can't think to everybody's comfort level, but from my perspective, it's kind of like a manifestation, I guess. Like if you're only hearing all of the risks and the what ifs and, you know, then you start to doubt yourself when really you should be building your confidence and building your strength. And so I 100% get what you're saying. Exactly. And I also feel like there's so much that is built around the what if, and so much that, you know, like if you're going to be in an environment where they specialize in risk assessment and like they specialize in what's the word? There is a word and it's on the tip of my tongue. Like emergency, that's right. And it's like, you know, if you're going to be in that environment where that's what they're looking for, then don't be surprised if that's what they find. Whereas if you're at home and you're surrounding yourself with people that trust, and it's definitely this kind of unshakableness that I had, like, because I was where I was working, I had the demographic was kind of middle-aged white women were coming in being like, oh, so where are you going to have your baby? Not like, how are you? Or, you know, very much like, oh, you look good for being so pregnant, or, oh, you barely look pregnant. Like it's like it's a very like external thing. Like I think that's. Sorry, we didn't have the best night's sleep last night. It's like it's an inconvenience to be pregnant instead of this beautiful thing that's just happening, and, you know, having questions like, how do you feel? And, you know, is this your first baby? Or like the only positive thing, I kid you not, that I heard in that whole time being pregnant, working in that space, was a man who was from Sri Lanka, because we were talking about spices and stuff like that, and he was telling me where he was from, and he said, oh, is this your first baby? And I looked at him and I said, yes. And he said, oh, you're going to love it. Oh my That was the only positive thing. All these women were like, oh, you should be worried, and have you thought about this, and which hospital are you going to go to, and make sure you take your own pillow because their pillows suck. And I was just like, I'm going to have my baby in my bathroom.
And I'll be having my own pillow. So,
and they're just looking at me like, what? Yeah, that's right. I'm going to birth the baby and walk to my bed. That's my plan. You know, like, oh, what's your birth plan? And I was like, well, I'm going to have my baby and then I'm going to walk to my bed, and that's my plan.
Yeah. I hadn't ever really thought about, you know, like it is very much, oh, you look this way, you look that way. Oh, but what if this? What if that? And now that I'm reflecting on it, I actually don't think, at least with my Frankie, I don't think anybody ever said anything apart from like probably my midwife. I don't think anybody said anything like positive or reassuring or, you know, like touching on the more internalized aspect of it. Yeah, because it's like pregnancy, you look a certain way. But like, I think that's, especially in our society, like very westernized, very medicalized, is that we don't put any focus on the internal aspect, like the growth that women undertake during pregnancy. Like, you're growing life, like, and we are consciously able to understand that we're growing life, and that's a whole journey in itself. And then I think that's like why I'm so passionate about birth stories and like touching on, you know, you don't just look pregnant, like you actually are going through an emotional, for some people they can identify it as spiritual. I would say it's spiritual, like evolution, I guess. And that's why your birth experience 100% matters. Because it's not just, you know, it is normal, boring birth, but it shouldn't be chaotic, traumatic, uncontrolled, distressing birth. Like, it's not just that one moment. It carries on, like the way that it makes you feel. And maybe if we were saying, oh, like, like the Spice Man, you're going to love it. Then things, in society might be a bit different.
Well, I think like for me, what I observed with Frankie being, you know, there was a lot of like, oh, she'll learn, like, oh, bless her, she thinks it's going to be okay, but she'll know what it's really like. There was this whole like air of my decisions were almost laughable because I haven't experienced it yet. And that I will learn. And I think it's such a freaking shame that is the narrative that so many first-time mums are receiving. And I, like, even before I had Frankie, definitely when I was planning my free birth with Fred, it's like, dude, I'm not taking this shit lightly. I'm going to stay at home on my own and have a baby and do one of the biggest things that I'm ever going to do as a woman. Yeah, I'm doing it just because I feel like it, you know? Like, what? It's a huge decision. It's a huge thing to do. And absolutely there are some women who choose to birth at home who want to... they know themselves enough where they know that they actually can't do that research because they want to just feel into it and take the day as it comes. I did want to do all the research because I know myself well enough where I did want to know it all, or my version, I should say, of it all, so that I could then start to put things down and be like, okay, I know that, I can just put that aside now and just do the thing, because birth just happens and I can just do this. And I think like, so going back to Frank's birth, like, you know, the labor was beautiful. It was obviously, you know, it was huge and I had never experienced labor before, but I could totally handle it. And I was like, oh, great, like, this is awesome. And of course, fear came in when the fetal ejection reflex kicked in really soon. And I was like, oh, what? And I thought it was too soon. And I had all this, fear of like pushing on an undilated cervix and getting swelling, and which is very interesting, actually. I'm literally just thinking about this right now, but that's kind of what I manifested in my second birth. A little bit, but we'll get there. But yeah, like I was just I was watching David Attenborough on the bed roaring like the lions I was watching, and then Toby was like, this is really ramping up, and I thought that it wasn't. I was like still just happily just in it, and he was like, no, these are like every minute lasting for a minute, like this is really kicking off, but time just disappeared, and and again, the labor was great. The bits that weren't great were the bits that involved my midwife.
Wow.
I asked her specifically not to ask me when I'm in labor to give if I wanted a vaginal exam. And she did. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, good idea. And it was the worst part, and and it was kind of the beginning of like, oh, actually, this is hard. But that's because I was in transition and I didn't realize it at the time. But and I just started pushing essentially. And I looked at Tobias and I was like, it's too soon. Something's wrong. Like, what's going on? Like, I was so scared. And then Jude came back, and then we went in the pool, and I lay on my back for ages. And I'm sure this is the case in most countries, but in New Zealand, you have to have another midwife there. And so there was a whole other woman who I had never met in my house, and I asked her to keep like all the medical stuff with her in the lounge because I didn't want to see it. And Jude, actually, I'll make this point, because of COVID, she was supposed to wear like a hazmat suit.
Oh my gosh.
Which blows my mind.
What?
And I was just like, nah. And she, out of respect for us, she didn't. And she just wore a mask and gloves, which I know gloves anyway, but she just wore the mask. And so that was great. So she was just in there with me, and the other midwife popped her head round the corner at one point and just was like, maybe she's stuck, like that, as in the baby.
No.
And it was just, there was a lot taking me out of my process because it was so pleasurable. I wasn't stuck. She wasn't stuck. I was choosing to keep the process going in a sense because the pushing sensation once I was in the pool was so pleasurable, and I was really enjoying it. So I was like, nah, I can do this. If this is labor, I can do this. And then before, but anyway, it was a long time. I think it was like 30 hours all up. And then I had this thing of, so when the other lady came in and said maybe she's stuck, I was like, nah, okay. And so I just got up. We got up, and I kind of was on like a one-legged runner's lunge kind of thing, if you can visualize that. And then another contraction came, and she just shot out, and that's when I was like, oh, okay, this is the ring of fire that they talk about. This is not so pleasurable, but it was over so quickly. I was like, whoa. And then she was here. We didn't know she was a girl because we didn't
do the scans,
do any of that side of things, but we knew, and so I just yelled out, she's here, she's coming, or whatever I said, and then she was there. And again, the unenjoyable part of that was the midwife trying to like get in there with her, she yelled out, I can't fucking see a thing.
No.
And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. Because I asked for all the lights off, and I was like, oh, okay, we've got swearing. And then she was like, I mean, I swear a lot. Truly, like, it's not, I wasn't offended,
oh my
but
gosh,
I was like, oh,
Poppy.
okay. And
oh my God.
And then she tried to get in there and bring Frankie up, for us, with us. I'm not sure really what, but anyway. And so I was like, oh, and then it was just this shock of like, oh yeah, she's here, but so are you. And then, and then I got helped out of the pool, taken to my bedroom. And then 20 minutes later, she said, let's get the placenta out.
Is this,
and I was like, what?
Is this Jude or the second midwife?
No, this is Jude. This is, truly, I love Jude. She is amazing.
Jude, yeah.
And like I said, she's still a midwife. She still has her job to do. And there was, so just a heads up, Freddie's awake, but he's just chilling on the bed.
That's okay. That's all right. It's fine. It's fine.
No, and look, on reflection, it was late. She was born at bang on 12:01, so it was late. They had already been there for a while. I think they just wanted to go home, but it was flipped. The narrative was like, "Oh, you must be so tired. You've just done this big thing. Let's get the placenta out so you can have a sleep." And I was like, "But I said that I didn't anyway." So, and I was. Right? I was fucking tired. I had just done this big thing, but I didn't. That was her job to hold space for that and be like, you're doing so great. The placenta will come. But that's not what happened. And so she pulled the placenta out. And then we were new parents with our baby. And that was that. And like I said, because of COVID, I didn't have my family, so we didn't have any help. So day 2, I think, I got out of bed, and I still chilled on the sofa and did my thing, but it was very much like up, go, carry on as normal. And I've truly thought that I had this perfect birth. The stuff around the cervical exam, the stuff around the placenta being managed, the stuff around her trying to grab Freddie as well, didn't surface for many, many months. So I was in this blissful bubble for a long, long time. And breastfeeding was really easy. It was just gorgeous. Like, we had this perfect angel baby. Like when she was is just perfect. Yeah. And I don't know what else you want to ask about after.
Yeah, that's okay. I started reading last night, Birth Like a Feminist. I think her name's Millie Hill or something. And in that, at the start of the book, she, basically talks about you get the vibe, right, at the start. And then she describes her birth experience, and she was like, I just couldn't understand how basically hardcore feminist she is. And yes, she can say no, and she's not afraid to say no and stand up for herself and whatever else. But then her birth experience was so different. And granted, she had a hospital birth with that baby that she describes in the first couple of pages. But I guess it's so interesting. I think I had a similar experience that once Murphy was born, I was like, oh my gosh, I had a home birth, I had my baby at home, so magical, so amazing. And it was absolutely. But it wasn't until I, was pregnant and having my Frankie that I was like, oh, wait a second. There were actually some things that weren't actually what I wanted in Murphy's birth. And it's just, or also second midwife, I see so many similarities in your story. but also just like how vulnerable you are in birth. And no matter how strong and powerful and, like, you know, if you know how to say no, amazing. If you feel confident to say no, brilliant. But in birth and labor, you are so vulnerable. Like, it's just, it's just mind blowing to me. I mean, like in so many ways, I guess I reflect that, well, it's better than if I was in hospital, because if I was in hospital, it would have been 1,000 times more. But like still, it just, I think we don't
That's
value.
women having to kind of like search for crumbs. Like, at least it wasn't like this. At least you got that. And in the hospital, that narrative is even stronger. They say, at least you have a live baby, or at least your baby is happy and healthy and alive. Yeah. Like, that is the baseline. I just want to speak about touch on something you just said. Yeah. Like when you said about how, when you said that there's similarities and that we need that time, I think, we protect ourselves, you know, like we are so fiercely protective of our births, especially when we're in a world where we are going against the grain and we are doing something that isn't commonly done, even though it used to be the only way it was done. And I think the interesting part of it is that this whole thing of like, you know, like, just like people saying, well, have the hospital bag just in case. After having Frankie, there was a very clear divide of people that I felt like I could tell my story to, and people I felt like I couldn't, because I didn't want to make them feel bad that I had a good experience. Yeah. And then the people that I felt like I could tell, I didn't want to over share, because I felt like I had to kind of dim my story down a little bit to meet. Yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but there's like a polarization that happens. You know, you can't share it if you have a traumatic story, and you can't share if you have a good outcome, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely differs. I think when telling my story, and I look back, I shared it on social media, like the written story of the birth of Murphy. And when I look back at that story, I am like, whoa, it's like somebody else wrote that, because that's not actually how I feel now.
Yeah.
But it was because I was sharing it like with a particular audience, that I felt like I had to bring it to the level that the audience would be, you know, I guess, be like, wow, that's so amazing. You're amazing. And if you added any like negative detail, the story changes so quickly. Yeah. And I just,
Isn't that so funny?
Yeah. And so with the birth of Freddie, with Alfred, you decided to ditch the midwives.
Yeah, so we had already moved. We had moved north, and so I went 2.5 years, or almost 2.5 years, without my cycle after having Frankie. And we had decided to try for another baby just anyway. So we were like, we'll just start now. And then, but anyway, I did end up getting a bleed, and then I only had 2 bleeds, and then I got pregnant again. But this baby was a loss. We lost a baby in between Frankie and Freddie. I think I was about 7 weeks pregnant. And then, so that was a huge experience, I suppose. And a really necessary one, I think, to be fully pushed into free birth and what that means, and to take radical responsibility and really acknowledge that if I were to have, knowing what I know and how I feel about birth, I knew that the only reason I would outsource anything is so that if something went wrong, I could blame somebody else. Wow. And so having a baby leave us was a huge realization of like, oh, okay, no, that's what responsibility means, because I didn't have any scans, I didn't have anything. We just waited and we bled and we cried and we did the thing together at home, and I didn't outsource any of the miscarriage either, and I kept it to myself. I didn't tell anybody because I wanted to just deal with it. And it was a huge time, a huge lesson, and it prepared me so much more. And then I only had one more bleed, and then we were pregnant again. So I just felt like it was time and ready and necessary. And so we got pregnant, and that's when it all began, I suppose, of the journey to free birth. I obviously had done all the research prior, and I actually was on a journey of undoing some stuff around what people think about me. It was very much ego death after ego death, I think. I knew what I needed to know, and actually it was just about working on who I was and my letting go and being able to trust and surrender and all those trigger words. And then...
Yeah. I think I read something recently about free birth, and I love what you just said about radical responsibility. I've written that down. That's such an amazing way to put it, because so much of the fear.
Well, it's actually from the book you're reading.
Oh, that's what I thought. I was like, wow, did Poppy actually collaborate with this person? It's totally radical responsibility, but so much of the conversation around birth, just in general, like birth and I guess pregnancy, is death and grief. Yeah. And how could you... Nobody wants anybody to die. I can't even imagine my babies not being with me, you know? I can't fathom that. But I think it's a really important and necessary thing to think about when you are making these decisions around birth, because you do have to take radical responsibility. And I guess it's the same as if you get in a car, you kind of take radical responsibility that people die in car crashes every single day, every hour, everywhere in the world. Yeah. I could, in theory, today go to work and have a car crash. That is a very real possibility. But I'm not going to not go to work just because I'm afraid to, be in a car crash and then also not survive that car crash. I guess in a way I'm taking radical responsibility to get in the car to get to point B, and I think in society, we also have a lot of trouble talking about death and grief. Yeah. And it's very poorly understood, I feel. I find that so sad that you felt perhaps that you couldn't share losing a baby?
Oh, well, no, I think I shared it with...
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I shared it with the people that I knew trusted the way that I was going to choose to deal with it. And I protected myself from judgment of people who would, through their own fear, worry for me if I didn't go and get a scan, or if I didn't go and make sure that all the tissue was gone, or all those scary things. I shared it with people who were going to hold me in the moment and not let fear come in, because, you know, I was definitely going to have another baby at some point. I was definitely going to stay on this track. And to me, if I wasn't going to birth at a hospital, I definitely wasn't going to go and experience a miscarriage in a hospital. Like, that's the last place I would want to go. And I think that's the biggest difference, is that people, you either go there or you don't. That, of course, there's like gray area in between for some people, but for me, it was just a hard no. After Freddie, because Freddie's pregnancy was really different. I was sick for most of it. I think only the last like 3 or 4 months was I in a place of like enjoying my pregnancy. I put on a bunch of weight. I had like caffeine withdrawals. I was a grumpy butt. I really was. And it was really hard. And I was obviously overjoyed and doing all the work mentally to prepare for the free birth. And then everything was different, basically. My waters broke first this time, whereas with Frank, they broke about 2 hours before she arrived. And Frankie and I were lying in the bed, and I was like, oh, and we were just watching all this fluid come out of my vagina, and we were both just like in awe. I was super in awe, and it was like glossy, and it was just amazing. And I was just watching it like, oh my God, it's happening finally, you know? And I called my sister, and she, because it was just going to be me, Tobias, and my sister there for the birth. And so I called her. She was in Auckland, so she had to travel 4 hours. So I was like, okay, come now. But bless her, stuff didn't really kick in until the next night. So I had, the first kind of red flag, if you will, from an allopathic point of view, is my waters were open for over 12 hours before things kind of kicked off. And then, I just started feeling these surges, like, and they were every hour, like bang on, but totally fine. I could deal with it, totally fine. And then after quite a few hours, it was bedtime for my daughter, who I didn't think about. And she was needing me, and I went to go and lie down with her, and all of a sudden labor just like kicked in. Like I couldn't talk. I couldn't not make sound. I was like immediately in this like primal moaning / borderline screaming. It just went from 0 to 60, like, and it freaked her out. It really freaked her out. And so then I had that kind of looming over me the whole time. So my sister came to get me. Tobias took over bedtime. Anyway, and again, my beautiful family protecting me. So Frankie didn't sleep till 4 a.m. the next day, because she was so wired, knowing that something was happening with her mum. And she was only, she was only 2, almost 3 at that point. So she was little, and she was just wired. But they told me that she had gone to sleep hours before. So I was like, oh, okay. Anyway, labor, it was hard and fast. It was hard and fast. And again, I started pushing really soon, and I was worried again. Nope, it's too soon. It's too soon. And it was just totally different to what I remembered. The pain was immense. Nothing about it was pleasurable.
Yeah.
I was scared. I was just worried. I was like, oh my God. And then I was like, oh, the pool, that's right. Because I felt such relief getting in the pool with Frankie. I was like, okay, I'm going to get in the pool and everything will change. And nope. I got in the pool and I was like, fuck. This still sucks. And so again, I tried to redo Frankie's birth, which was just not in hindsight, it was just not the path I should have taken. But I lay on my back and hoped that helped, and it just didn't. And then I changed, it was like every position I could think of in the pool, and nothing. And the weight of him was just crazy on my cervix and on my vagina. And I was just like, holy shit. And nothing helped, nothing. And then I got out of the pool eventually. And that's when Grace, Tobias, and I started looking at each other and being like, what is going on? Like, this, you've been pushing for so long and nothing's happening. And I started to verbalize things at that point. I started to say, it's not working. Something is wrong. And so my sister gave me a hand mirror.
That's okay. It's all right.
My sister gave me a hand mirror, and I had to come out of my internal world, and I had to midwife myself basically. And I held the mirror and I looked while I was having a contraction, and I watched my vagina open and I watched this head come down. Yeah. But I could also see a lot of swelling, and both my top and bottom of my vagina, my vaginal walls were so swollen. They were coming out first and not allowing the head to pass. Yeah. And so obviously I was looking at this and I was like, shit, that's not right. But I didn't want to freak them out. I didn't want to freak myself out. But we all knew. And so, it was just, then on, it was very much like I wasn't in this blissful free birth world. I was in like full on risk analysis, try and figure this shit out place. But I will say that at no point was I like, we have to go to the hospital. Like, I just knew that the safest place for me and Fred was at home. Yeah. And that if we went to the hospital, I was too freaked out to think about what they would do if they saw the position I was in, the position he was in, the swelling, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So we just powered through. And so almost 5 hours went by of pushing, and then and I was exhausted, as you can imagine. Yeah. And I looked at my sister, and she just looked at me and she just said, look, you need to stand up. I think you need gravity, and that's the only position you haven't tried. And I was like, I know. I was like, fuck, yeah, I know. Okay. And so I asked for a big chair, like a tall chair to lean over. And I leant over the chair, and without contractions, because fear had taken over me, I pushed him out. So I had one contraction, started the pushing, held him there, waited for the contraction to go, held him, pushed with everything in like a deep squat. Yeah. And then another contraction, and then he came all the way out. Wow. And we were all just like in shock. I was going to say awe, but that's probably not the right word immediately.
Yeah.
We were in shock.
Yeah.
Tobias like collapsed and just started crying. So did my sister.
Oh my gosh.
And Freddie was just there. I think, we were just so taken back by what just happened. He was so slippery and he just kind of fell to the floor, and then I picked him up, or we picked him up, and then he was just on me. And I can say this because he's my baby, but remember how I said that Frankie was born and we were like, oh my God, she's perfect. When Freddie was born, I was like, oh my God, I broke him.
Send
like,
me back.
He's broken. And my...
What is this alien?
This fear came in that I broke my baby, that I was pushing him for too long. And so he was born with an enormous reverse cone head.
Yeah.
And he looked like a beluga whale. And I was just like, oh my God. And of course I did though also have this overwhelming thing of love. I was just like, oh my God, he's here. You're perfect. I love you. And there was this other side, the rational side, I suppose, that was like, is that okay? Is that much swelling okay? Like, because of course the head can collapse, the plates can overlap when they come out.
Yeah.
You know, that there's a reason it's called crowning. Yeah. But he was brow presenting, so he came out in the most awkward, biggest possible way that he could have, and he was posterior, so it was just nuts. Like, just so much, you know, working air quotes against us. Yeah. But we fucking did it. We did it anyway. Yeah. And within 2 hours of his birth, his swelling completely disappeared, and he was left with like a halo bruise around his brow and his head. And then the placenta, which I was really scared of, because I didn't have the chance to birth Frankie's placenta. I was really nervous about his. And then about an hour after he was born, I said to Tobias and my dad, I said, the placenta's ready. And we went to the toilet and it just came out and it was perfect. And
Amazing.
the relief I felt, because I was like, it's not over till the placenta sings.
Exactly.
And it was easy, and it just happened. And then it was all of us just in my living room. And then that's when I found out that Frank had only been asleep for like an hour at this point.
Yeah.
And but I felt relief because I knew that I had many hours of just us, because she would sleep for so long. And and he breastfed like straight away. He was a big boy. He was just over 9 pounds, and he was just gorgeous. Like, he was just easy and so chill, and his sleeping was amazing. And a funny thing actually is my parents have a batch that they rent out, that they Airbnb, sorry.
Yeah.
And the night that I went into labor, they had a last minute booking, and it was a doctor and a midwife.
Oh my gosh. That's so eerie. That's so freaky.
Like, I know. Like, what the hell? I know. Anyway, the reason I say that is because we knew. So even though we were terrified, and there was people right there that we technically could have outsourced all of this to, we knew that we weren't going to. We were, we were terrified, but we were terrified together, and we fucking did it. We did it. And it was huge for all of us. And we still talk about it regularly. Like, it was only 10 months ago, and so the swelling that I was telling you about was a prolapse. So I actually prolapsed after I realized after having him that I had a vaginal wall prolapse, and I obviously a lot of processing around that, a lot of guilt, I suppose, of like, oh, I did this to myself, and if I did outsource it, maybe it wouldn't have happened. But since that, a lot of shame came up, a lot of guilt, a lot of mostly shame, because I'm a woman. But I was like, oh my God, I did this to myself.
Yeah, okay, so did you feel, or have you felt that the shame comes from, you did this, you thinking that you did this to yourself, and that this was some sort of, I don't know, I want to say like irresponsibility from your part. Not that it was, but is that how you felt? Or
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, that's 100% what came up, because, the whole pregnancy I was working against the grain, trying to justify wanting to birth at home, let alone free birth, because we live in the middle of nowhere. So if something were to go wrong, it would be at least an hour and a half to get to any kind of place, because the birth center that was an hour away closed. So like 2 hours to the nearest place. And so there was a lot. So when I realized that there was I had a physical consequence, I suppose, to my birthing at home, I felt a lot of shame around that. But since talking to Jude again, because I told her the story, wanting some questions answered, because of course I had a lot of questions. She confirmed what I already kind of knew, but she just said, look, if even her, who was a kind of more of like a kind of free thinking midwife, if you will, she would have transferred me. She would have saw the swelling and gone, no, let alone brow presenting posterior baby. Like, it just would have been a no. It would have been a cesarean, and I would have been so heavily managed from as soon as I arrived. And so our instinct that, yes, this doesn't feel right, but this is the safest place we need to be, kicked back in once I got over the shock of the prolapse. And I just knew that, to heal, because I tore pretty decently as well. I'll never know how bad, but it was pretty bad. And I think I definitely would have gotten multiple stitches if I was in the hospital setting. Yeah. And, just like with the miscarriage, after the birth, the last place I wanted to be was in a hospital. And so, I healed myself. We healed as a family. And my postpartum was so important to me, because my first postpartum was so non-existent. So I had, I didn't lift a finger for like almost 3 weeks. And I just made sure that I healed. And I think because of the birth that we had, I needed that. And it meant that I was able to heal a decent tear. I was able to heal a mental load of the birth itself. And I was able to do a full circle and be like, fuck yeah, I will do that again. Yeah. Even though it was terrifying, but I 100% will free birth again, because that's what again, it's that unshakableness. That's just what feels right. And I can happily report that I have reversed my prolapse as well. on my own.
Amazing. Amazing. Well done. I wonder, when sitting down with Jude and talking it all through, and Jude, says, like, if I had been there, we would have transferred. Well, I mean, she couldn't like physically take you there, but the advice would be to go to hospital. How, and then that you would perhaps probably have ended up with a C-section. How, like, do you have any thoughts around that? Like, I'm just trying to think, like, if somebody said that to me, like, I think I would end up with so many questions rather than answers still. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway of after being told that was validation, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I felt more sure about the decision that we made, and I felt like I was the proof in the pudding to my own questions that I had been having, whether or not I was making the right decision to birth at home. Yeah. Like, if we were in a hospital setting, and of course, I would never be able to confirm this, but I've been told now by two separate people who are in the two separate midwives, that if that were to have happened at a midwife-attended home birth, it would have been a transfer. And from that transfer, the cascade of interventions is the part that's unfathomable to me.
Yeah.
Whereas to people who aren't open to a free birth or home birth setting, then the birth that I had is unfathomable to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I am left with questions, but what it's done for me is it's validated the experience we went through, because it was huge.
Yeah.
And it's also made me more sure that the decision I made was absolutely the best one that I could have, to protect myself, to protect my baby, because he would have been taken away from me at some stage with his cone head situation. He would have probably needed oxygen. He would, because when he was born, he wasn't struggling in my eyes, but from birth stories that I've heard and read and seen, he probably would have been like, or they probably would have been like, okay, we need to give this baby assistance. He's just been through a super traumatic thing. His heart rate probably dropped, rada. Instead of just putting him on me, feeding him straight away, and then it was perfect. Yeah. So yeah, sorry if that's a very roundabout way of saying, but it validated me.
Yeah. I also think it goes back to that radical responsibility and the way that you've experienced this and the way that you describe this experience with Freddie, like how different that would have been if you had have gone into a place that you don't feel safe. All of your decisions would have been taken away from you. You would have, Freddie would have most likely been taken away from you as well. You wouldn't know what was happening with Freddie. The story would have been so different, and the argument would have been, we were just trying to keep everybody safe. But in the end, you and Freddie were safe, and you felt safe, and it was difficult and challenging and, all of those things, but those were your decisions, and you had made those decisions about your body your baby. And I think that's where the radical responsibility comes in. It doesn't matter if you don't agree with somebody's decision or if all you can see is the risks involved. What matters is that you are an individual, you're a human, you're a person, you're an adult capable of making your own decisions around your body and your baby. And I think, it doesn't have to be this whatever definition of perfect that people have, because for some people that wouldn't have been a great outcome. They would hear your story and say, well, that was crazy. I would have preferred to go into hospital, but that's not what you wanted. And so it doesn't matter what other people say. What you wanted was to have this experience, and you did. And it happened. And you're amazing. And I suspect that you feel so empowered from it as well.
Yeah, and I think, like, empowered, yes, but also I think if we were, because so since having him, I've had only my immediate people be like, wow, well done. Everybody else has been like, wow, you're so lucky. Or like, wow, imagine if, but what if it didn't go, and I've had friends be like, oh, so next time you'll have a midwife, right? And I'm just like, wow, like if the lesson, like, to me, if the lesson is not, I knew on some level that the safest possible way, like if that's the way that he wanted to be birthed, like, holy moly, sure. But my decision to do that at home meant that he still had the best possible entry into the world. Yeah. As opposed to this this like feeling of like, but if it was managed, if there was a midwife there, maybe something would have, gone differently. And I just don't feel that way. I just don't. Like, what I know about birth means that if I chose any other way, it would have been intervention after intervention, and our story, the start to our story would be so different. And my ability to heal a decent tear and then a prolapse, I don't think I'd be where I am if I didn't also go through the rest of it. So I think being educated to the point that you, knowing yourself, are comfortable with doing whatever it is that you want to do is the important part. At least it was for me. Like, I've had people say, I chose not to do the research because there are people there who do that for you. Like, that there's a reason there's midwives, there's a reason there's hospitals. And my argument to that always is, okay, well then where does that line end? Is that line a blur to you? Because as women particularly, we outsource everything. And the beginning of this journey for me was how little can I outsource? And what I've come to is, next to nothing when it comes to birth. Like, literally nothing. I had a completely wild pregnancy. I didn't even take a pregnancy test. And then I birthed alone, and then I healed alone. And I think, and when I say alone, that's, I don't mean alone. I had who I needed with me, people who supported me, people who trusted me. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent there, but you know what I mean? I think the outsource culture that we currently live in is the problem, in my opinion, with so much. So much. I think that's like a whole other podcast.
And I wonder if when you get your podcast started, whether that might be something that you might discuss, like in relation to motherhood and womanhood. Because I guess
I'll be all over that.
That's amazing. I'm so excited to listen to it. Thank you so much for sharing those stories. I think that they've really made me think, and I think they're so valuable to the whole collection of stories told by women about birth, because we don't hear these stories, you know. Usually if something is like not in a straight line, it doesn't fit the neat, perfect box. You know, okay, well, you go and have this intervention. And I think I'm amazed listening to your stories, and I think you're incredible. And the trust that you feel in your body is beautiful, amazing.
Yeah, and just before we end this, I just want to say, it's not that, like, I worked fucking hard to get to this place. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, yes, I had this like unwavering thing and rada, but you know, just like people saying that it's such an easy thing to do this thing, it's like, well, no, it's not actually. Like, we women who birth the way that I have, there's been so much that goes into it. It's not just this, you know, maybe it is for some women. It wasn't for me. It was no, I'm going to take responsibility. And that means that there's a lot of work that goes into it. And I applaud all the women who birth whatever way that they do, of course. And it is an interesting thing going against the dominant narrative around when it comes to birth and postpartum. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me on and listening for over an hour. Very valuable stories. And thank you also for putting up with the lag, which has also been an experience. Yeah, well, look, it's perfect for me. I can't hear it. So I'm sorry that your experience was like that. That's so funny. I am going to end it there.